So here's a closer look at the new calves. These animals, they'll let me get a little bit closer to them without running off. And so if y'all want to take a look at them, here they are. But this is, you know, when I went to the sale barn and I started buying animals, you know, when I went to the sale barn, the whole idea was that I would purchase #1 type commodity animals, more of a realistic commodity type animal, and I would pay commodity prices for them. And this is what a more of a legitimate commodity type animal looks like. All right, so you know, like if you go to the sale barn and you buy commodity animals, this is more or less what a commodity type animal looks like. All right, more or less, you know, a #1 type commodity animal. And so here's what they look like. They'll let me get a little close to them. They'll actually let me walk up to them. And so, but this is what they look like. Okay, I got 10 of them. They're all doing okay. You know, I'm not gonna get way too close to them because they'll go running off, and you know, but they're you know, they're not running off when they see me now. So I'll let y'all take a look at them. But that's the commodity type animal. You know, those are the animals that I bought. I got a coffee in my hand. Give me 1 second. I gotta open this gate. That sick animal, yesterday I was taking a look at him, and so okay, yesterday morning when I was taking a look at this calf, the reason that I was like he is sick was because #1, he was breathing very fast. Okay, and yesterday it was like 60 degrees in the morning. All right, the thing about these animals is that, like, you know, if it's 60 degrees and they're not doing anything, they're just standing out there, right? They're just standing out in the pasture or whatever, and it's 60 degrees. They shouldn't be panting. Okay, they shouldn't be breathing really fast. I mean, he was breathing fast. It was like he was having an asthma attack. He was breathing very quickly. I would say that his breathing was probably 2 or 3 times the normal. Okay, you know, he was breathing very fast. And when I moved him around just a little bit to get him in the preconditioning pen so I could give him a shot, he started coughing, and he started kind of foaming at the mouth. And so those were very early indicators. And when I take a look at him now, his breathing rate has substantially subsided. Okay, he's not breathing very fast or nothing. So he's obviously feeling better. But that's the thing about antibiotics, is that when you give the animals an antibiotic, you know, usually it starts working within about 12 to 24 hours. Okay, you can take a look at him. He looks okay now. He doesn't look like he's having any problems, and so that's very good. He reacted very good to very well to the antibiotics. So the animal, I don't think he's sick anymore, but I'm gonna leave him there for just maybe 24 more hours, just to keep a real good eye on him, make sure that he recovers fully, and then I'll let him out. But that's you know, that's why I gave him the shot yesterday. Okay, I got out here actually. Okay, so the whole time thing, that when I got out here, it was about 8 a.m. okay, I got out here about 8 a.m. The sun was just about coming up. The sun was just starting to come up. And I had actually penned the animals in the front. You know, and I'm actually glad that I did. Well, what was going to happen was that I was going to take some more animals to the vet. I had a few 3 animals that I wanted to take to the vet to get some you know, to get some work done on them. And I was going to do that, but then I got a text message from my leg doctor saying that I had to come in for an appointment on Wednesday morning. I thought that my appointment was on Thursday, and so I actually ended up going to the leg doctor yesterday. And you know, here's the you know, I got my bandage on my leg. They worked on my leg yesterday, and so you know, I didn't think that I was going to the doctor yesterday, but turns out I did. And so I just let the animals out loose, because I'm not going to take the animals to the doctor, or I'm not going to take the animals to the vet, and then I have to get ready for the doctor and then go to the doctor. I'm going to be late, right? And so I had the animals penned up in the front, and I was going to take them to the doctor. And you know, then I got a text message early that morning saying that I got to go into the doctor on Wednesday. So I was like, well, you know, so I just let him back out. But you know, before I let him back out, I was sitting there taking a look at him, and I realized that animal was just not looking good. Okay, I could see it from a very far away. the animal was not looking good. And when I got up close to the animal, it was 8 in the morning. Okay, when I was looking at the animal, maybe it was 7:30, maybe it was 7 o'clock. But when I got up close to the animal and I took a look at him, it was about 8 a.m. and he was breathing very fast. All right, he was breathing very fast. It was like he was having an asthma attack. It was like 58 degrees. There was no reason for him to be panting or getting hot. All right, and so, that's when I gave him the shot. And I took a look at him last night, and his breathing rate has subsided substantially. His breathing rate is back to normal, and he looks okay. So I'll just give him 24 more hours, and then I'll let him out. Okay, so right now, in terms of I want to talk about money, because I'll talk about money today. And yesterday I was talking about this whole, and I feel like this is a good way to conceptualize this idea. Because let's conceptualize this idea. Let's take a look at it from a different angle. And the whole thing about even when I tell you whatever, I give you my information for free. I tell you exactly how I do everything. At the end of the day, I cannot do the work for you, right? I put a lot of emphasis on this. If you don't go out and do the work yourself, you're not ever going to get the results. It doesn't matter how much head knowledge you have. All right, it doesn't matter how many books you read. All right, if you don't actually go out and actually do the work, you're not going to do anything. All right, you're not going to make it even to the 10% mark if you live to be 5,000. All right, and I even gave very realistic, practical examples of what you can do to actually just go out and practice. All right, when you want to fertilize a 10-acre field, how much does that cost? All right, you'll probably fertilize the field 7 or 8 months out of the year, and when you take the average for it, maybe you'll pay about $350 a month. All right, even if you mess it up, you're out what, $350? It doesn't matter. Granted that we're talking about a 10-acre field, it doesn't matter. I put a lot of emphasis on this. It's not like you're running a multi-million-dollar business like I am. All right, if you want to run a multi-million-dollar business, if you want to start yourself a cattle farm and, run yourself a multi-million-dollar business, that's going to be different. You will have to perform you will effectively have to perform at the very, very, very highest level on many things, or you will fail. And when you fail, you will lose everything and then some. You will probably never recover. That's also why I don't suggest that you throw a Hail Mary into the middle of nowhere. All right, there is no skipping the work. And so let's talk about it in terms of, taking a look at it from another angle. Because I've already talked about the idea of an unrealized gain, right? What is an unrealized gain? And, when it comes to money, I effectively just pay myself whatever I believe that I need. All right, that's how much I pay myself. I don't pay myself the maximum amount of money that my business makes. I pay myself whatever I believe it is that I need. All right, that's how much I pay myself. So yesterday I was talking about this idea of I don't, and a couple days ago I was telling you about this idea that I don't leverage my balance sheet more than 1-for-1. I don't leverage my balance sheet more than 1-for-1. But when I spoke about my income, I said that I invest about 125 to 150% of my income. And so I wanted to talk about this idea, the difference between your income and your balance sheet. All right, so when I go and my business plan is the business plan, right? I got my business plan. When I go and I buy an animal, that animal is now effectively on my balance sheet, right? I've given you all my business plan. It doesn't even matter if I'm buying a 300 or 400 pound animal. I bought a set of 400-pound animals a couple days ago. And whatever, right? It doesn't matter what weight the animal that I buy, as long as I can make money on them and I have a realistic idea for how I will do that's what's more important. Understanding your investment is the most fundamental thing you can do with an investment. When it comes to an investment, it doesn't matter what anybody thinks. You yourself need to understand your investment. All right, this is very important. A lot of people have a lot of opinions. They're effectively borderline bums. Okay, they're not gonna. You need to understand your investment yourself. All right, that's what it comes down to. So I bought a set of 400-pound animals. Okay, And I paid commodity prices for them, okay? And effectively, when I sell them, I'll probably sell them at feeder weight. And when I sell them at feeder weight, how do I, if I went and I purchased a set of #1 type animals, right? I purchased true commodity type animals. When I sell them at 800 pounds, how do I estimate what they will be worth? Granted that half of them are heifers, okay? Half of them are heifers, and so the heifers will be worth a little bit less than the, okay, but using my formula, granted that I have some heifers, right? How do I determine the price of the animal at 800 pounds, right? And heifers, they kind of top out at 700. All right, you don't really want to take heifers to 800 pounds. I would suggest liquidating heifers a little bit cheaper, or not. It's not a little bit cheaper, a little bit lighter. All right, you'll probably just be more pro. You will do better if you liquidate your heifers at 700. Okay, that's just from what I've seen. Your heifers at 700 will I would suggest liquidating heifers at 700 and liquidating steers at 800. Okay, in terms of feeder cattle, okay? And so when I take a look at my situation, right, if I have okay, let's just talk about the steers to make things a little bit more simple. I went and I purchased a true set of commodity type animals, and I paid commodity prices for them. When I take these steers to 800 pounds, how would I estimate what that steer is going to be worth at 800 pounds? Granted that I do my part and I raise the animal properly, how much will that animal be worth? How do I figure that out? I go on the internet and I look up the price of feeder cattle. And when I do that, the price of feeder cattle is on the stock market, being traded as a global commodity. All right, Billy Joe Bob does not determine what your animal is worth. You go on the internet and you look it up. And when you go on the internet and you look it up, the price of feeder cattle will be being traded on the stock market as a global commodity. That's how you do it. All right, that's how you do it. That's the answer. All right, and so, okay, let's talk about the idea of a balance sheet and the idea of income, because I was talking about this a couple of days ago, and I was talking about this yesterday. The idea of leveraging against the balance sheet. I don't want to leverage more than 1-for-1 on my balance sheet, but when I take a look at my income, I invest about 125 to 150% of my income. So how do I do that? This all ties back into the idea of think about my herd as two separate herds. I have a stabilized herd and then I have an unstable herd. All right, think about it like that. And in this situation, you have to understand, okay, so in the whole idea of an unrealized gain. So think about it like this. I go to the sale barn and I buy an animal. And let's say I buy the animal at 250 pounds and I pay, or whatever, 225 pounds, and I pay $1,000 for the animal. I pay $450 a pound, okay? And so I buy the animal for $1,000. And I take a look at the feeder cattle, situation. And if it's a true #1 type animal, I'd even pay up to $1,100 because whatever, right? The feeder cattle number is the feeder cattle number. And if they're a true #1 type steer, then I would be willing to pay a little bit more. And so I take a look at them, and and I say, okay, well, I have this animal. So I purchased this #1 type steer at 250 pounds. And I put that animal on my balance sheet. That animal is now on my balance sheet. I raised that animal for 4 months. I raised that animal for 5 months. I raised that animal for 6 months. I raised that animal for 7 months. And at 4 months, I take a look at the animal and I say, well, the animal is about 550 pounds. So I appraise that animal, right? I take a look at the animal and I objectively appraise the animal. All right, I brought the animal home at 250. And 3 months later, the animal is, 4 months later, the animal is 550 pounds. So I take a look at that animal and then I appraise the animal, right? I appraise the animal. I take an objective look at the animal. I brought this animal at 250. The animal now weighs 550. This is a true #1 type commodity steer. When I appraise the value of this animal, what do I believe the appraisal value is? Then the next month, at 5 months, I do it again. I believe that the animal weighs 630 pounds. I appraise the animal. The next month, I believe the animal weighs 710 pounds. I appraise the animal. And then on the final month, I believe the animal weighs 800 pounds. Then I appraise the animal. When the animal weighs 800 pounds and I have determined that I am looking at a number one type commodity steer, and that steer has effectively been raised to a commercial standard. All right, I have met the benchmarks for commercial grading. The animal's at a body conditioning score of 6, right? I mean, we're not talking about like a 2-year-old animal. This animal's probably just now a yearling and weighs about 800 pounds. All right, how do I determine the cost of that animal? How do I appraise that animal? All right, I go on the stock market and I look up the price of feeder cattle, and the feeder cattle number is effectively a global commodity. You look it up and boom, there it is. All right, that's the appraisal value of your animal. So when I do that, I now have an 800-pound steer, right? I now have an 800-pound steer, and I have objectively appraised this animal. Right? I have taken a look at the animal, and I have appraised this animal. And I take a look at that animal and I say, I now have an 800-pound steer, but I brought this animal home at 250 pounds. Is that 800-pound animal worth more than a 250-pound animal? Yes, substantially more, maybe even more than double, like 2.2 times more. All right, 2.2 times. I've said this for a long time. If and whatever, the cost of feed or whatever, the cost of feed is kind of like this arbitrary, it's kind of like this whatever thing, because you have to understand that I grow my own grass. And when I grow grass, I effectively grow grass so well that I may be legitimately one of the best in the world at it. All right, I grow a massive amount of grass, and it hardly costs me anything. All right, feed is kind of like arbitrary. It kind of doesn't matter, because I grow so much of it for such a low cost. And even when I take a look at my grain, if I am feeding my animal 1 pound of grain, or 6, or whatever it may be, right, 5 pounds of grain. Let's say I'm paying. Let's say I pay $1 for 1% of the animal's body weight in grain, and I feed the animal that grain. If I spend $1 on the grain and I make $2.20 back, do I really spend any money on grain? No, I don't. Right? This is the big idea, right? This is the fundamental idea of my business. I'm in the grass growing business. I'm not really, if I did not grow the grass, I would not even bother running the cattle. And also, when it comes to growing grass, it doesn't hardly cost anything. Even if you mess it up, you're out a couple of $100. All right, you're still better off learning how to grow grass. All right, you should spend your time focused on learning how to grow grass first. Because if you can grow grass, the thing about growing grass is that it is borderline free. Borderline free. All right, I think I invest maybe $15 per animal to grow grass. And when I invest that $15, the animals put on like 75, 90 pounds a month on that $15. All right, the grass is practically free. For me to grow all of this grass on 10.5 acres, it costs me about $350. And here's okay, if we're going to talk about the nitty-gritty on money. All right, first of all, and I talk about this all the time. When I talk about money, I'm not bragging about it. I'm not bragging about it. You shouldn't get discouraged about it. I mean, it just is what it is. Okay, that I don't know how else to tell you. It just is what it is. Okay, so let's talk about fine details. When you take let's talk finite numbers. I would actually anticipate, and I've already told you what the big idea for my money is, right? What am I going to do with the money? What am I going to do with the money, right? What am I going to do with the money? I'm going to reinvest all of it back into my business, okay? That's the big idea. I'm not going to go and buy myself a Lamborghini. I'm not going to go and buy myself a whatever. I'm going to reinvest all of my money back into my business. So how much money are we talking about? Okay. So I would anticipate that I invest about $30,000 a month into my business. And over the next 3 to 5 months, I will actually double that number, maybe even a little bit more. All right, and the reason that I'm going to, okay, so and here's how I will do that. All right, you know, because I've already told y'all, you know, exactly what I'm doing, and I'm not lying to you about it. All right, I am telling you the truth, and at the end of the day, at least I'm telling you the truth. All right, what am I going to do with the money? How much money is going to be involved? I would anticipate that I invest about $30,000 a month into my business. All right, 20,000 of that money will be money that I make by myself on this business. All right, it will just be me reinvesting my earnings, and then $10,000 a month or so will be leverage. Why would I do that? Because then I would be leveraging against 50% of my earnings. I might even increase that to 100% of my earnings, because I've already talked about, you know, if I just leverage against my earnings and I don't leverage against my balance sheet, you know, that still technically keeps me under the 1-to-1 mark, because my balance sheet has effectively a bunch of stabilized animals, right? You know, and the whole idea of having an animal on my balance sheet is that if I bring home an animal at 250 pounds, that animal's very high risk, right? That animal's very high risk to very high risk. And by the time I raise that animal to 550 pounds, the animal is effectively just good to go. All right, they're effectively good to go. They're not very much risk at all, and that's what I call my low risk herd, right? That's what I call my stabilized herd. And so if I have whatever, right, 40-50 animals on my stabilized herd, those animals are effectively going to be profitable. Granted that I continue to grow the grass and I continue to take care of the animals will effectively be profitable for about the next 4 months, 3 to 4 months, depending on, you know, the frame size, the heifer, the steer, depending on the next, you know, whatever it may be. Okay, the animal will continue to be profitable for 3 to 4 months. That animal, I brought them in at 250 pounds, and now they weigh 550. That 300 pounds of gain, I probably put that weight on them for $50. And then I use $50 worth of medication. So I'm all in $100, right? I'm all in $1,100, and the animal's probably worth $1,800, $1,700. So that difference between the money that I put, okay, and you know, the whole idea of an unrealized gain is that, you know, when I have an animal on my balance sheet, and you know, I have an animal on my balance sheet, and that animal, I have objectively taken a look at the animal and appraised the value of the animal, and I've done it properly, right? I'm not just I'm not doing that. Right, I take a look at the animal and I have objectively appraised the animal, and I've done it properly, and I have determined that the value of the animal is significantly higher than what I have put into the animal. That, you know, that difference, the difference between the two numbers is the unrealized gain. It's an unrealized gain. I can realize gains whenever I want. I can pay myself whatever I want. All right, do I pay myself the maximum amount of money that my business makes? No, I don't. All right, why would I do that? If I did that, I mean, and I've spoken about this, like if I legitimately felt like sitting here for the rest of my life and running my business sideways, if that was legitimately my goal, I talk about this in terms of business, right? There are effectively 3 directions that you can take your business. You can take your business into the ground, you're failing. You can take your business sideways. You're effectively scraping money off of your business forever. You don't really have any real idea of doing better for yourself, or you can do better for yourself. Those are the 3 directions that you can go with your business, and the people who are looking to do better for themselves are worth substantially more. The multiples go higher. So let's talk about my business, okay? And I'm just going to give you the honest truth. I will be investing probably about $30,000 a month into my business, and over the next 3 to 5 months, I will probably double that number. I will be investing closer to $60,000 or $70,000 a month into my business. When I take a look at everything that I got going on, when I take a look at it, I would say that my earnings, my revenue will be about $20,000 a month, but I will leverage against my earnings. All right, I will leverage against my earnings. I will reinvest all of my earnings, and I will leverage against my earnings as well. All right, and the reason that I would leverage against my earnings, and this whole thing ties back into the idea of income and balance sheet. When I have a balance sheet, and that balance sheet has assets on that balance sheet. And let's say I take a look at my balance sheet and I'm like, I brought in a majority of these animals at 250 pounds. The average weight of my herd is 550. And if I use the feeder cattle number and take a 10% deduction, then that's effectively, a very realistic gauge of what I can sell my animals for in terms of price per pound, at 700 for the heifers and 800 for the steers, right? Very simple, okay? And then I take a look at that, and then that's how I appraise the value of my animal. So I take a look at that, and I say, okay, well, then when I do that, I would anticipate that my balance sheet has this amount of assets. In terms of a numerical figure, I believe that my balance sheet has this much assets on it. I don't leverage against my balance sheet, okay? That's the big idea right now, is that I'm not going to leverage against my balance sheet. I will leverage against my earnings, all right? And if I leverage against all of my earnings, I may even be investing $40,000 a month. I'm just being honest about it. I mean, why would I lie about it? If I lied about it, I mean, it would be on it. It would be easy to see, okay? And y'all are gonna see here in about 2.5 weeks, when I start liquidating cattle, I would actually anticipate that I actually even double my income over the next 3 to 5 months. I would reasonably anticipate. I'm not some delusional moron. All right, I would reasonably anticipate that I double my income over the next 3 to 5 months, okay? And what does that look like? All right, what does that look like? Well, I would anticipate that I actually invest about $30, maybe even up to $40,000 a month back into my business. All right, I will invest about $40,000 a month into my business. And over the course of 3 to 5 months, I will probably double that number. All right, I will probably double that number. That's the direction that I'm going. I've already decided that I will reinvest all of my money back into my business. All right, I've already decided to do it. I said, why not? That's what I feel like I'm going. That's what I believe I should do with the money. All right, I will be investing about $40,000 a month into my business. About 20,000 of that will be straight earnings, and then the rest of it will be leverage. And the reason that I utilize leverage, and I already spoke about this yesterday, the big idea of why I utilize leverage is because, when I take that leverage and I purchase tax deductible assets, and I purchase them at reasonable appraisal values, right? I don't just, go and buy a meme coin. I don't just go and buy some worthless asset. All right, if you have a bunch of worthless assets, you're effectively not going to be worth anything forever. You're effectively just going to die poor. All right, I don't know how else to put it. You don't want bad assets. All right, I wouldn't touch a bad asset with a 50,000 foot pole. You don't want bad assets, okay? They'll just, they'll be effectively a negative on your balance sheet for all eternity. All right, all eternity. There is no fixing a bad asset. All right, it won't happen. All right, just buy a good asset. And the whole thing about a good asset is that when you take a look at the price of an asset, granted that you have an appraisal value for that asset and it's being appraised properly, I mean, the price of an asset really does not matter. All right, because at the end of the day, your asset should be equitable. You're just trading your money for the asset. And when you trade your money for the asset, you're effectively just, instead of, you effectively still have money. You just don't have cash. All right, the asset is worth, cash is the most ridiculous way to have money. All right, cash is the most ridiculous way to have money. If you have assets, your assets and are worth money as well. That's like the most realistic way for me to put it. All right, your assets are worth money. You don't need cash to have money. Cash is the most ridiculous way to have money. You get taxed the most. I mean, it's whatever, right? And when you have an asset, your asset will even appreciate if you have a good asset and it produces you something like a return or a dividend or something. All right, and so you're better off holding a good investment. All right, you don't want to be in a situation where you think cash is money. Cash is money, but it's not the only way to have money. It's the most ridiculous way to have money. All right, if and I've already said, the big idea of this whole thing is that almost always when you take a look at it in terms of an overall situation, increasing your income and then investing the difference is effectively how you can get yourself out of being poor forever. All right, that's the answer. All right, that's the answer. All right, you increase your income and then you invest the difference. All right, that's how you, and when you invest the difference, how do you do that, right? You purchase good assets, okay? Don't buy bad assets. Bad assets will never be worth anything. All right, even if you're having some delusional fantasy and you think that, oh my God, maybe one day this meme coin will do better, it won't. All right, bad assets are not worth anything. Don't put your money in bad assets, okay? At the end of the day, the price of an asset does not really even matter. If it produces you a positive return and you purchase the asset at an appraisal value, then you're good to go. All right, granted that your asset was appraised by somebody who actually understood the asset. All right, that's what's more important. All right, and and I'm just gonna be honest about it. When we talk, and the whole idea of a balance sheet and income is that, I don't have to leverage against my balance sheet, okay, because my balance sheet effectively has assets on it. I don't have to leverage against the entirety of my balance sheet to effectively leverage against more than 100% of my income. And I do want to leverage against more than 100% of my income, because when I do that, I get tax benefits. All right, I get tax benefits. That's why I want to do it. All right, when I utilize leverage to purchase tax-deductible assets, I get tax benefits. All right, so the whole idea is that, when you take a look at my situation, and the whole idea of the balance sheet and the income is that I can have assets on a balance sheet that have gained money via an unrealized gain. All right, my balance sheet is appreciating, but I have not paid myself the money yet. All right, that's the big idea. All right, so my balance sheet has assets on it, and the assets are going up in value. And I have not paid myself the money yet. I hold on to those assets, and then I leverage, and then I take a loan. And when I do that, effectively, that is how you end up in a situation where you have, 70% leverage against your balance sheet, and you have 125, 150% of your income that's how much you invest. That's how I did it. I actually do this stuff, right? I'm not giving you the wrong information. I actually do this stuff. All right, this is actually what I do, and I'm giving you my information for free. All right, I can take leverage and I can invest like 125, 150% of my income, and I would only be leveraged against 70% of my balance sheet. Even if whatever, right? I would effectively have to, whatever, right? I can be leveraged against 70% of my total assets while still being leveraged against 125 to 150% of my income. And when I do that, I get good tax benefits, right? And I'm not even in the negative. I'm still net positive 30%. Right? And that's how I do it. And when I take a look at it in terms of numbers, if I'm just gonna be straightforward honest with you, I will be in, okay. And this is what I've been saying. If you thought that I made a lot of money, if you thought that I made a lot of money, you are about to crap your pants. I've already decided that I will be reinvesting all of my money back into my business, okay? I would anticipate that I invest about $30,000 to $40,000 a month into my business, and I will actually be ramping that up to about double over the next 3 to 5 months. All right, that legitimately, that is the direction that I'm going. You can mark my words. That is the direction that I'm going. I've already decided I will make more money. I don't want to just sit here and just scrape money off my business forever. Even right now, if I spent $10,000 a month, it would not matter. My business would effectively run sideways, and I can just go and spend $10,000 on whatever I want every single month, and it wouldn't matter. But I've already decided to increase the size of my business. I've already decided to expand my business. I even found a new piece of land, okay? I'm going to go and take a look at it this Monday. But, I'll be investing about $30,000 a month, maybe even $40,000 a month into my business. And over the course of 3 to 5 months, I will double that number. All right, I will. That's the direction that I'm going. I've already decided that is what I'm going to do. How will I do that? Reinvest all of my earnings and then leverage against a portion of it. That's how I will do it. All right, I would anticipate it's going to be something like I make about $20,000 a month, and then I take about $10,000 to $20,000 worth of leverage every month, and then I reinvest all of that money into my business, and then I will have my balance sheet, and I will not leverage against my balance sheet at all. My balance sheet will effectively be my safety buffer. So I can reinvest all of my earnings, and you know, I can risk the earnings and I can leverage against the earnings as well, but I will never go over 1-to-1 leverage of my balance sheet. If I take a look at how much debt I have and I think that the debt is getting close to the appraisal value of my entire balance sheet, I won't do it. All right, you know, I'll reduce the amount of debt load or whatever else it is that I need to do, increase my income, do something else. That's how I'm going to do it, okay? And so, you know, that's it for me today, YouTube. Y'all have a good one.